Hi everyone, it's Paul Tilley and welcome back. In this particular video I'm going to explain the basic concept of a work breakdown structure with an example. And you'll find this example in your textbook for the course. So a work breakdown structure involves taking a project and doing as much research on the project as possible. So if there's something, for example, that you're not familiar with within the project, in your role as a project manager, you're going to go out and speak to subject matter experts. So for example, if you're building a building and you don't know much about concrete preparation, you need to go talk to people who prepare concrete and get them to explain the steps in terms of putting up a foundation wall or these sorts of things. In this particular example, what we're doing is looking at building a house. So the very first thing you need to do with the house is really have a foundation in which to put the house on. So that would be the number one chunk of information that you look at. So in terms of a broad category item, let's look at the foundation and let's dig into that a little deeper, pardon the pun. In order to build a foundation, you need to dig a hole first. You need to put a hole in for footings. Now, you may not know much about building houses, so what you need to do is go talk to experts and ask them, how do you build a house? The foundation is first. How do you build a foundation? What are the steps involved in building a foundation? So we got to go through that step process with either ourselves or in consultation with experts. So if you think about building a foundation, we need to be able to excavate it. We got to dig a hole. Then we got to be able to put the basic framing in order to pour cement. And then we actually pour the cement into the framing in order to create the foundation. And then, for example, we got to take down the framing, backfill. These sorts of things would need to be done. So that's what we call a breakdown structure. To carry on even further, then we would say, okay, let's think about the actual elements that we talked about. Well, in terms of excavation, what are the subcomponents of that? Well, if we look at excavation, we got to be able to dig it. We got to be able to level it. These things take time. They're individual little projects that would be contemplated by a single individual or a group of individuals that would take a chunk of time. If we think about the framing, well, it's pretty straightforward to be able to put up the framing. But if we think about concrete, we got to be able to pour it, we got to cure it. These sorts of things need to be brought into the mix. Then we say, okay, we've got our foundation in place. We've done all that work. What do we do next? Well, let's look at the exterior of the house as the next major component. So exterior work would involve things like, again, framing, putting on the roof, putting in the windows, putting on the siding, and painting it, all in that order. So these would be individual tasks that would be carried on by specific trades or specific people, and they could be considered a chunk. So that's what we're looking about in a breakdown structures, building these chunks. Now, if we think about some of those chunks, they could probably be even more refined. For example, roofing. We could think of roofing as putting on the shingles and then putting up the gutters. Or we could think of the siding in terms of putting on bricks, masonry, or putting on paneling, or putting on trim. These could be components of that as well. That would be subcomponents of a given item. Next, we move to the interior of the house. And when we think about the interior of the house, we have to think about putting in the plumbing, putting up the walls, installing the electrical, installing the flooring. Again, specific trades would probably be involved in that sort of thing. So we'd have to think about those as little chunk projects. And some of them could be even broken down more. If you think about plumbing, it could be broken down into drainage, could be thinking about hot and cold water lines being installed. In terms of the walls, we could think about framing the walls, insulating the walls, putting up drywall, plastering the drywall, and painting. And in terms of electrical, well, we got to rough it in first of all, run the wires, test it, and then bring in the appliances. And in terms of the flooring, then we talk about, putting down carpet or putting down tile or putting down any other type of floor covering. You would think of that as a sub-job. So effectively, what you see here is the breakdown structure of building a house. These are the various components. And we could think about each of those tasks as taking an amount of time. You'll see percentages here. For example, the foundation is estimated will take 25% of the time. So the exterior would take about 30% of the time. Interior would take about 40% of the time. And we can even refine the percentages even more by looking at each of the specific tasks as we've done here. And being able to get an estimate of where we should be at any given point in time and how much work needs to be put into it. So work breakdown structure is really the mental construction process that needs to go on whenever we're building anything. And it is very much what we would consider planning. It helps us think about how long it's going to take. It helps us think about what we're going to need in order to make it happen. And it helps us estimate time and cost. So that's what is meant by a work breakdown structure. As usual, if you have any questions, let me know. Thanks.